Translating failures into SLOs.
Failure sucks. I mean, who wants to fall on their face?
But failures are also opportunities for learning so that we can be successful in the future.
Hey y'all, I'm Adriana Villela. I'm a senior developer advocate at Lightstep. I code, I like to blog, and I like to climb things.
Hey y'all, my name's Ana Margarita Medina. I'm a staff developer advocate at Lightstep. I love coding, all things reliability, and I love doing fun makeup looks. And I love eating and making Latin food.
Alright, well that's enough about us. Let's get to the meaty bits here. So today, we'll be walking back from failure to reliability by leveraging SLOs using examples from 3 recent outages that affected many of us.
Right before jumping in, I know we're at SLOconf and this might be a refresher for some of you, but what are SLOs? And what are some of the best practices for setting them?
Yeah, you know what? That is a really great question. Now, an SLO is a service level objective, and they're one of the practices that we've embraced from SRE that allow us to measure reliability over time. Now, before we set an SLO, we have to set an SLI, or service level indicator. An SLI is nothing more than a metric. That is, it's a thing you measure, and more specifically, it's a 2-dimensional metric that answers the question, what should I be measuring and observing? Now, an SLO is informed by an SLI, which is just a fancy way of saying that SLIs are the building blocks of SLOs. Now, SLOs help answer the question, what is the reliability goal of the service? And as far as some of the best practices that we should follow around SLOs, we want to always remember the following. Number 1, when creating SLOs, we have to create them with SLIs that are as close to the customer impact as possible. Number 2, not everything has to be an SLO. And number 3, well, I'll leave that up to Liz Fong-Jones to explain it because she does a really good job of it.
An SLO has to be a living, breathing thing, not just a thing that you put up on a dashboard and you look at it 90 days later and oops, we blew our SLO, right? Like, that's not how you make SLOs relevant and actionable. The way that you make SLOs actionable is by tying them to your observability data.
Now that we've had our quick refresher, let's go ahead and dig into our outages. We will be covering 3 outages today. But first I want to say that in no means we are picking on any of these outages or on any of the engineers that worked on them. If anything, #hugops to all of you, or hugops to any engineer that just knows the pain of carrying a pager. Our goal for today is to show you how you can learn from failure, how you can leverage incidences to be more reliable. Okay, now, let's go ahead and get started. Our first outage for today is going to be Twitter's outage that happened on March 6, 2023. In this outage, users were getting the nasty old error stating, your current API plan does not include access to this endpoint. Please see developer.twitter.com/en/docs/twitter-API for more information. Yikes! What a terrible error message to receive, especially when this is happening across various endpoints. If you were to log into Twitter, you'll see that images were also broken, and a lot of folks were just complaining about everything going on. Since users weren't able to hit the API endpoint, maybe we would want our SLO to reflect that. Something like having an SLO of 99.95% availability of Twitter API in the last 28 days.
Well, not really. The thing is, it's not customer facing enough. In this case, the API was available, but it was still going to give an access error. The SLO would not have been breached, and your team would not have gotten alerted for this incident. We would prefer something more customer facing like this one. 99.95% successful responses in the last 28 days. Measuring SLO telemetry is best done from the perspective of the client rather than the API directly, because if the API is down, then you don't have SLOs.
That makes sense. Why do we actually set SLOs with 28 days in mind?
Well, 28 days equals 4 weeks, and it ensures that the SLO always starts at the beginning of the week and ends at the end of the week.
Now this brings us to outage number 2, Spotify. The issue was triggered by scheduled maintenance of GitHub Enterprise, or GHE, causing internal DNS resolvers to fail. You see, once GHE was brought back up, invalid configuration was applied to the DNS resolvers. And when the DNS resolvers picked up that invalid configuration, the system entered a crash loop and was unable to serve responses to internal DNS queries. This then led to cascading failures across their tooling, including their internal tooling, which led to longer triage time.
Would we be able to make this an SLO? 99.99 successful access to config from GitHub in the last 28 days. Or how about 99.99% availability to internal tooling API in the last 28 days?
Well, not exactly. That would not be a customer-facing SLO, and this was a configuration issue, so a better SLO would be something like this. 99.99% successful valid configuration sent to DNS resolvers in the last 28 days. Now, we can easily get the metrics for the SLO from the client. It's important to remember that when we experience an outage, we must revisit our SLOs and make sure that the outage covers our SLOs. And if not, we must go back to the drawing board.
Ah, that makes sense. I need to remember to make them customer facing. The last outage we have prepared for today is a recent one you might recall, the Reddit Pi Day outage on March 14, 2023. This outage occurred when Reddit engineers attempted to upgrade one of their Kubernetes clusters. Shortly after the upgrade, engineers noticed that site traffic had come to a halt. As they began troubleshooting, they noticed that their pods were taking an extremely long time to start and stop, and that their container images were taking a very long time to pull. Additionally, someone spotted that Reddit was getting a lot of timeouts in the API server logs for write operations, but not specifically for the writes themselves. Rather, it was timeouts calling the admission controllers on its own clusters. The team eventually decided to restore from backup, but even that was not without its own set of challenges. Since the backup instructions were out of date, among other things, they were unable to successfully apply the TLS certificates at first due to a hostname mismatch.
Then, would we want to make SLOs like these? 99.99% availability for API server in the last 28 days. Or perhaps we're looking at 99.99% successful connection to DNS server in the last 28 days.
Well, first, we actually don't want to have too many SLOs. If an SLO for DNS exists, it should be coming from the provider itself, such as the cloud provider or DNS provider, and the availability of the API would actually not be a gauge if this is happening in a timely manner or there are valid responses. Alex Hidalgo actually reminds us of this in his book around SLOs. A better SLO would be what Reddit actually has in place right now. 99.95% availability on overall services in the last 28 days. An SLO shouldn't care what failed. You just know that you weren't able to make the request. The how is explained by your telemetry, such as your traces, metrics, and logs. This outage also reminds us of two practices from DevOps and SRE that we should always be practicing: slow rollouts and canaries, and always remember to keep your docs up to date.
You know what? That's really great advice. The thing is, having good rollout practices in place, ensuring that your systems are observable, and having up-to-date runbooks really make a huge difference when trying to bring your systems back up, whether it's due to outage or maintenance. Also want to remind folks that we can learn from incidents from other companies like the ones that we have presented here today. There are incident databases like the Void community out there that you can leverage to find out and learn about more failures. But that's not all. We can also be proactive about failure and creating SLOs from Chaos Engineering game days. Chaos engineering is the discipline of experimenting on a system in order to build confidence in the system's capability to withstand turbulent conditions in production. Now, we want to inject failure into our systems to see how they would react if this failure were to happen on its own. And this allows us to learn from failure, document it, and prepare for failures like it. And we can start practicing these types of experiments by leveraging game days.
Are you wondering what a game day is? Well, a game day is a time where your organization or team actually comes together to do chaos engineering. This is going to look very differently depending on the organization's maturity or the architecture. Many companies go about doing these as tabletop exercises. Some decide to leverage internal tooling or open source software, and some are leveraging vendors. No matter how you go about starting your practice, you will get the benefits of getting comfortable with failure and continuing to build a culture of embracing failure at your organization. You're basically going to do a chaos engineering experiment, whether it's hypothetical or you actually inject a failure into your systems, and you and your team or organization work together in those 3 or 4 hours to actually figure out what that failure is and share mental models and hopefully learn how to make things more reliable. This is a great time for you to continue checking on those service level objectives that we just finished setting up. And there you have it, folks. Hopefully you got a chance to learn how you can embrace the failure that happens at your organization and other organizations in the industry to set SLOs.
Thanks so much for chilling with us and learning about SLOs. Big shout out to my husband Ian for the bouldering footage. And thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to follow us on all the socials. Until next time, peace, love, and code.